of International Studies at the Columbia Institute for Tele-Information, CITI, which hosts this seminar series on a monthly basis on global digital governance. The seminar series started last year. We've covered a wide range of topics, and the videos and transcripts of our previous sessions are all on the series website if anybody's interested to see what we've done before. We'll be reconvening in January of next year to continue, and we'll be having sessions about things like the UN Cybercrime Treaty negotiations, international cooperation on governance of artificial intelligence and disinformation, the annual anniversary of the Declaration of the Future of the Internet, that was done last year, the Global Digital Compact Initiative in the UN, and so on. So we'll be covering a lot of topics, and we hope you'll be able to join us. Anybody who wants to can get on, and you can always shoot me a note if you want to be added to the distribution list if you're not already on it. So to today's topic, we're going to talk about the NETmundial +10 meeting that will be held next year. Maybe I should start with a little bit of history. I think a lot of the people I'm looking at so far who are online will know all this, but there may be some people who don't recall. So just to say that a decade ago, in the autumn of 2013, we were in a period of kind of geopolitical ferment around internet governance. Up to that point, multi-stakeholder cooperation had been having a bit of a moment coming out of the WSIS negotiations. We had the creation of the Internet Governance Forum. Technical bodies like ICANN were stepping up their game, trying to improve their multi-stakeholder mechanisms. Some organizations like the OECD in Paris were creating new mechanisms for multi-stakeholder participation. And then the mood shifted. We had a large coalition of governments pushing in the United Nations for enhanced cooperation negotiations to create a new UN body for internet governance. We had a lot of complaining about the speed of the IANA transition going on in the US. We had the ITU's WICIT negotiations, where there were a lot of proposals to extend that old telegraph and telephone treaty to cover the internet, which led to a disastrous breakdown in diplomacy. And then we had the Snowden revelations of mass surveillance, which stimulated a lot of statist responses around the world, portending internet fragmentation. And worse, we had the discovery that somebody in the NSA thought it was a good idea to tap the phone of the Brazilian president, Dilma Rousseff, which led her to then give a speech in the United Nations General Assembly in September calling for a multilateral mechanism to govern the internet. So that got a lot of people freaked out. And in October, leaders of the various internet technical bodies got together and released a Montevideo statement calling for reinvigoration of multi-stakeholder cooperation. And Fadi Chahadi, the CEO at the time of ICANN, flew to Brazil to meet with Rousseff, and they decided to hold the NETmundial meeting. This was announced in October for April of 2014. And the idea of a NETmundial was met with a lot of different reactions. There was skepticism, excitement, concerns, etc. But Brazil had a lot of street credibility given its successful multi-stakeholder experiences with the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee and its role in international negotiations. So there was a big mobilization of energies and creative thinking to get people on board. We had the creation of new mechanisms like the One Net Coalition to try and stimulate inputs to the process. We had the Ilves panel chaired by Estonian President Ilves on the future of international cooperation that put out a report on distributed governance networks as alternatives to international governmental mechanisms. And we had all this energy going on trying to get the process together. And there was a kind of rush in the first part of 2014 to organize the preparations. Brazil stood up the organizational structures very quickly. We had online consultations with 180 contributions. There was a draft text put together reflecting those contributions that was posted for comment, which got about 1,370 comments very quickly from people around the world. And then we had the meeting on the 23rd and 24th of April, 2014, with, I think, about 1,230 participants from around the world, which was a very interesting meeting and kind of a new kind of approach to trying to do international cooperation on internet governance with hubs for remote participation around the world. we had these wonderful plenary sessions where we had 4 microphones and the government people had to wait in line for their chance to speak alongside the technical community and academics and private sector and civil society. And we went through the draft document and then had to have breakout meetings, drafting committees, which were a bit controversial. Of course, everybody thought that somebody else was capturing the process, which is typical in multi-stakeholder processes. But at the end of the day, we ended up with a text that was approved by most of the people there. Russia, India, and Cuba did not sign off, as well as some civil society people. But it was a significant event, and we've had a lot of debate in the years since about just how significant it was. Critics, of course, say, well, it's just a one-off meeting, no big deal. Didn't really institutionalize any new processes that weren't going on already within the IGF and ICANN, et cetera. But there were a lot of others who felt that, no, this had been a kind of a breakthrough in demonstrating that you could do multi-stakeholder cooperation on broad internet governance issues as an alternative to working through purely intergovernmental processes and develop normative statements that capture the sentiment of the world around some issues. So this was a big thing. Then we had a lot of debate in the years to follow about, should some follow-up happen? And the Brazilians, led by CGI.br, got serious about this. We had discussions in Kyoto at the IGF meeting in November this year. And they announced after Kyoto that indeed they were going to go forward to organize a meeting for the spring of next year on the 10th anniversary of the NETmundial. And so we're here to try to start stimulating broader, more inclusive discussion about what that meeting could do and what we could all get out of it as an international community. There have been some small initial planning meetings, but nothing on a larger scale where everybody got to weigh in. So that's what we want to do. And to stimulate that conversation, we have an excellent panel of participants. Avi Doria is an independent researcher and consultant. She served on the ICANN board of directors and is the chair of the GNSO Council in ICANN. She's been a member of the UN Working Group on Internet Governance, UN Working Group on Enhanced Cooperation, the IGF Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Committee, and so on. And she has long been active in the IETF technical environment as well. Wolfgang Kleinvector is Professor Emeritus of International Communications at the University of Aarhus. He was a member of the ICANN Board of Directors, served as Special Ambassador for the NETmundial Initiative, which followed the NETmundial, is founder and chair of the European Summer School in Internet Governance, and was a member of the Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace and the UN Working Group in Internet Governance, and he's joining us from Germany. And finally, we have Renata Miele, who's the coordinator of the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee, CGI.br, and a special advisor to the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation. Previously, Renata has been a journalist for 25 years and has been working on digital rights issues. And she's also currently a PhD student at the University of São Paulo. So, academic in training while she's running these big elaborate processes. So that's great. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with just a few minutes of background from Renata to give people a sense of what's the current state of play and thinking in Brazil about how this meeting may go. And then I'll go to the panel for an integrated discussion. We'll talk about 3 kind of sets of questions until the top of the hour, and then we will open it up to dialogue with everybody in the room. So that's where we are. So, okay, let's start. Renata, if you could then. So could you just give us a little bit of an update on the state of play in terms of the dialogues that you've been having within Brazil and with the partners around the world about how you're thinking right now you'll scale this up, what it might look like, what's the ambition level, how can people engage? That would be really helpful as a starting point. You have to turn on.
Okay, Bill, thank you very much. First of all, now I would like to thank you for the invitation to being here with all of you. It's a pleasure discussing these important issues involving the future of the multi-stakeholder governance and the challenges around the digital world. It's also a pleasure to see so many familiar faces or names, because not everybody has your cameras on, but I see while here some few names and faces that are familiar. So it's some who are participating with us to put NETmundial Plus 10 on its feet. There are a lot of partners here with us today. And some of you are very reference, not only for me, but for everyone who is on this journey of defending multi-sectorial processes. Well, as you mentioned, 10 years ago, we were together in São Paulo, here in São Paulo. It's a very warm day today. On NETmundial as a community of several countries, organizations, and activists to discuss the challenge we had 10 years ago. Now, with plenty of uncertainty within the future of the governance ecosystem, we are facing new challenges. So one of these challenges is, well, our community has been discussing and participating in several different arenas and complexity in debates around this next 10 years. We have to cite only a few. We have the WSIS Plus 20 and the Global Digital Compact. We have the Summit of the Future. And all this process are overlapping themselves, and we have different countries have been putting up their own legislations and discussions around the internet, and not only the internet, around all this digital new age we are living. And we don't know if all these processes are converging. In fact, I think they are not converging, and so we have this problem maybe that this process can fragmentate the discussion and in some way weakening the multi-sectorial participation. So in this context, we have the stakeholders from the different interests and sectors demanding more and more transparency, support, and meaningful participation in these discussions and decisions that affect absolutely every one of us. So we are in this context again. We made some consultations, as you mentioned, with several partners, and decide to hold a NETmundial ad hoc event meeting in Brazil by the end of April. We are about the date. We are deciding in these days, maybe tomorrow or today, 22, 23, or 24, or 28, 29, 30 of April. We are seeing this with today or tomorrow. We are decide this, but okay, end of April, to gather stakeholders around a common agenda to define a concrete proposals for the future of the internet governance ecosystem and the multi-stakeholder approach. We are at this moment, maybe we have a name, but we didn't decide this yet, but I'm going to share with you. The name till now is NETmundial Plus 10, Global Challenges for the Governance of the Digital World. Because for us it's important to underline that there is no digital without internet, and this separated discussion, these two discussions, is, in my perspective at least, a mistake, a very huge mistake. So we are proposing this title né? As I said, we are thinking in a narrow scoped event with an outcome, maybe a final document, as we had 10 years ago, with concrete proposals for the future and the role of multi-stakeholder practices. A key question for me, and we are discussing this yet, is how we can improve the multi-stakeholder process to be more effective and in a way that this process can offer concrete results, recommendations, for example, to the multilateral processes and governmental decisions are taking place. We cannot close our eyes for this reality. We have this process occurring, and the participation of multi-stakeholder spaces have a little impact in these other spaces, as not in the international level, but in national level and local level. So we have to improve, and we have to show to these multilateral processes that we have a meaningful contribution and an important contribution to the decisions that are they made. And this is a key question for us. Okay. I think to start is that, and we discuss the other issues with you. I think it's okay for now.
Right. Great. Thank you, Renata. That's very helpful. So, okay, it's giving a good sense of the time frame. April, you are doing that to match also the digital ministerial meeting of the G20. So a lot of governmental people will be in Brazil at the same time. So we should be able to get a good government participation. At the same time, that schedule may be challenging for some other participants. So of course, an important thing will be the quality of the remote participation. I assume you're planning very much a hybrid event and have been thinking about modalities to bring people in from around the world so that they can weigh in on any document, et cetera, right?
Right. And about this, is important to say that NETmundial is not an official G20 event, né? But of course, holding NETmundial in the year in which Brazil is the G20 presidency is something that can give more visibility to our event, to NETmundial. And we are even working to ensure that NETmundial takes place close to the meetings of the G20 Digital Economy Group. The idea inclusive is to hold in together with the Information Integrity Trail event that will happen in São Paulo with us too. Or in other words, one day the G20 side event takes place, and the other 2 days we will have NETmundial. And of course, it will be a hybrid event to fully give the ways to people around the world participate in a dynamic and effective way, even in online participation. And Bill, the previously NETmundial already have online participation.
Right.
So 10 years, we have more and more technical possibilities to support this.
Right. Back then, we used hubs in a couple dozen countries. Now everybody can do it from their desktop. So I hope that you will also encourage the G20 to think about more inclusive remote participation. But okay, by the way, I managed to misspeak already because normally we start at 11 o'clock Eastern time, and today we started a half hour early. So I misspoke. We will open it to discussion in 40 minutes. at the half hour. So let me turn to the panel then. So let's start with a discussion, the context of the rationale. Renata said that they're thinking about what's going on in the multi-stakeholder environment as we were a decade ago. Clearly, like then, we seem to be in kind of a governance polycrisis. There's a lot going on internationally, both in terms of intergovernmental negotiations that are problematic, like the Cybercrime Treaty, the Global Digital Compact stuff, et cetera. There's a lot of industry consolidation and misbehavior that people are concerned about. There's information disorders, expanding state controls, interstate rivalries, internet fragmentation, you name it. We have a big, complex environment going on. So I asked the panel, and we could start with Aubrey if you want. To what geopolitical developments should the NETmundial +10 be responsive? How can this process of doing a multi-stakeholder thing contribute best, in your view, to the geopolitical situation we face? Aubrey, and then Wolfgang and Renata, if you want to join us too.
Okay, thanks, Bill, and thank you, Renata. I was actually quite happy to hear about how it was being looked at and how it was, sort of looking at the global challenge and focusing on how we do governance. One of the things that I think is happening with all of these efforts, almost every one of them is saying that to some degree, it is multi-stakeholder. I mean, we have everything, even on the multilateral side, where people talk about participatory multilateralism or inclusive multilateralism, or we have multi-layer governance, or any number of terms, and even within multi-stakeholder, there's any number of models, and we constantly have people pointing at, well, you're not really being multi-stakeholder. Well, you're not really being multi-stakeholder. And something like NETmundial, which last time came out with some models for, hey, here's how to approach it, folks, is to basically look at it and sort of say, how do we understand what we are doing in a multi-stakeholder or a multi-participatory, or use whatever names we want, so that we can actually show that we're all moving towards a goal of greater participation in all of these subject areas, and how to perhaps get people, because I've been wandering lately between this effort, that effort, and the other, and there's real confusion about what is the participatory model? How do we work it? How do we understand it? How do we participate in it? How do we connect it to the democracy? And to support democracy? Everyone talks about lately, democracy needs participation to be supported. And then how do we connect it to the multilaterals, et cetera, in terms of making sure that it fits, making sure that we have interfaces? All of that requires a better understanding of our model. At the last, and I'll stop in a second, at the last NETmundial, there was a real effort to sort of give some indicators of, if you want to be multi-stakeholder. So now look at, first of all, what effect has that had? And then how can we build on that to sort of at least stop everybody from finger pointing and say, you're not multi-stakeholder, we are, but rather to the point of, well, yeah, you're doing a multi-stakeholder type process here at this stage of the process, but at this stage of the process, you seem to be abandoning it. Maybe you could do this, maybe you could do that, or at least understand the picture we've all got. So I think that's where I would start with that is, let's figure out what it is we're actually doing in a governance model and how it fits the multilateral, the democratic, and even the non-democratic. How do we deal with that? And from the multi-stakeholder, or whatever name we want to give it, process.
Thanks, Aubrey. I think that's really helpful. The attention to models of cooperation is really important, especially now we're in such an era of intergovernmental plus, where so many processes seem to be intergovernmental with a bit of multi-stakeholder consultation rather than the kind of multi-stakeholder decision-making processes that we were looking forward to a decade ago. Wolfgang.
But even that consultation is multi-stakeholder process, and it shouldn't be belittled.
Oh yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Wolfgang.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, first of all, Bill, for arranging this, and also for Renata giving us the background for the meeting, and I just can continue what Avri have said, and Bill and Avri were in the working group on internet governance, and I remember that at the eve of the working group, the first working group meeting, we had a meeting in New York with Kofi Annan, and Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and this time gave a wonderful speech arguing that he said we need a governance for the internet, but that doesn't mean that the governance of the internet has to be the same as we govern other problems. And his argument was the internet is an innovation in technology, and what we need is innovation in policy making. And at this time, nobody had an idea, what innovation in policy making could be, because the procedures for policy making has been established decades ago. And we continue even in the 21st century in a format of policy making like we did in the 20th century, sometimes like in the 19th century. So the challenge for the WCAG was to innovate policy making. And what we delivered at the end was the proposal to have a multi-stakeholder approach to the governance of the internet, because everything was thinking, at least in New York, in multilateral terms. So, and multi-stakeholderism at this time was rather new. And what we did and this was the task of the WCAG, was to give a definition for internet governance. And this definition, this was a proposal by the WCAG, made its way word by word into the Tunis agenda. That means the definition is accepted by 193 governments of the world. It's like the Article 19 in the Human Rights Declaration, so everybody supports it. And this is a big achievement, because this is the groundwork that we have an agreement that all stakeholders has to participate in their respective roles. This is a little bit vague element of the definition, but nobody can manage the internet alone. So the problem and the weak points was that we had no clue about the principles of multi-stakeholder collaboration and the procedures. What NETmundial did.
Oh, you froze.
In the year 2014. It defined our Paulo document from 2014. We see all these principles: accountability, bottom-up policy development, openness, inclusiveness. All these are principles which are not basic principles for multilateral cooperation. So this is really the innovation in policy making. But what we do not have are procedures for the interaction among stakeholders. So that means when we left the chateau in the year 2005 and on the Lake Geneva, so we had a night session at 2 o'clock in the morning. Somebody asked the question, we have defined now the role of the stakeholders, but what about the interaction? And Nitin Desai, the chair of the WCAG, said, oh, this will take a long time. We have no time anymore. And now, so this is really a missing point. We do not have procedures, and this leads to confusion about how to implement the multi-stakeholder model, because everybody has a different understanding what the multi-stakeholder model is. As Avri just has said, some governments said, if we consult, this is already multi-stakeholder. But the definition of the Tunis agenda speaks about sharing decision-making and sharing policy development. So between sharing and consultation, it's a broad range. And so insofar, I think the time is right now to be a little bit more precise about the procedures for the interaction among the various stakeholders. What is how governments can work together hand in hand with the private sector, with civil society and the technical community. We had a number of good experiences.
You're freezing again, Wolfgang. You need better internet connectivity in Leipzig. Let's give it a second and see if he's going to snap out of it. We're frozen. Wolfgang, you are frozen.
Yeah, it happened to me earlier. It just takes a little while to come back. Happens
Yep.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Okay. Wolfgang, why don't we continue on and come back to you, and you can add more to those points. So what we're hearing so far, though, there's a lot of discussion around not just like inputting to what's going on in various UN discussions, et cetera, but really trying to concentrate on multi-stakeholder process kind of points, which I think like maybe for the G20 people who are gathering, their G20 is kind of there is some openness. They have the different kind of groupings, that advisory groups, right? The T20, the B20, and so on, that put together documents, et cetera. But their process is not one that you would characterize as broadly strong multi-stakeholder decision-making. So maybe if you're bringing people in for that, this would be an important orientation to bring to the table.
Bill,
yeah.
I want to make a few comments about what Avery and Wolfgang said, and I completely agree with them. Because what are these multi-stakeholder processes like? What are our procedures? We don't have this. And so I think we need to better understand our model. And there is no only one model. Maybe we can have many, but we need a model or procedures to offer to the community. And you mentioned the geopolitical challenges. Regarding this, I think we are facing a scenario in which part of the main economic and political disputes in the world revolve around topics such as the dominance of digital technology and artificial intelligence, for example. Everything today is about artificial intelligence. And in this context, whoever has more protagonism, leadership, and control over the governance process of these issues will have more power. So therefore, the discussion of the challenges of governance in a digital world is a key issue. It's even important to highlight that we are living in a historic moment where democratic processes themselves are being questioned, not just the multi-stakeholder process. We are facing a failure of representative democracy around the world. And maybe we all here have this huge opportunity by discussing concrete mechanisms for how multi-stakeholder governance process can have concrete impacts on other decision-making spaces. And we will be making a contribution not only to internet or digital governance, but but to the democratic process themselves. Maybe it's a very huge goal, but I think in this way, I think it's.
Okay, thanks, Renata. I think those are all good points. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about the process then that you're going to go through, the preparations and the decision making, how to do that. I mean, those of us who were involved last time will recall, that CGI.BR, you from Hartwitt and the group, you guys had to stand up all this stuff really quickly to get the organizational structures put in place and begin to take in inputs from around the world. It was really a huge push to get all that together, but people stepped up and really engaged from the community around the world. And then you had this on-site process where we had to finalize things, and that was not without some controversies, obviously, but time management issues and the need to end up doing a lot of things in these breakout text drafting groups that some people felt were not sufficiently open, et cetera. So I guess a question in terms of process, then we'll turn to substance, then we'll open it up to everybody. But in the terms of the process of how to do this, what lessons could we learn from 2014 that would help make 2024 more successful or make it successful. And what have we learned in the past decade, really, about how to make multi-stakeholder procedures work in these kind of ventures? And a related question, if anybody wants to address it, I'm concerned about whether the global multi-stakeholder community and ecosystem is well organized and ready to engage at the same level that it was back in 2014, when we had ICANN and FADI really catalyzing a lot of things and pushing things together. And post-WSIS, there was still a lot of interaction between stakeholder groups. I'm not sure where we are now. So let's talk about those process aspects. I'm not sure what Wolfgang's status is, if he's back, but Avri, if you could lead off.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. First, I want to say how much I agree with what Renata was saying in terms of the whole notion of multi-stakeholder participation is kind of what is almost needed to bolster democracy at this point in time when it's having so many difficulties. You hear it in the press, you hear it in everywhere. We need more participation. Going back to 2014, I participated in it. I submitted various comments and statements to the text. I participated. Once I was there participating, I personally found myself lost. I really couldn't fit myself into any of the groups that were actually doing stuff. Somehow or other, I had missed that formative stage and watched the process pretty much the way through. And one of the things that the process didn't recognize that has been discussed and discovered since then is that any of these processes—
Are you heading out right now?
Is
Okay,
that,
I can do it. Just
am I still being heard or?
Yes, you are, Avri, but somebody needs to mute
Okay.
yeah.
their computer.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't doing something wrong here. We didn't quite recognize them. We talked about multi-stakeholder as sort of the same at every level of the process. Not only do we have this problematic discussion with roles and responsibilities where no one can agree on what anyone else's roles and responsibilities are, but we also don't look at those in a way that facilitates thinking about them. We don't look at the plan, and this is something that Bertrand de la Chapelle wrote about at the time of the NETmundial. Is you have, I think he had various 4 to 5 stages of planning through implementation with decision in the middle, etc. And each of those people have different roles and responsibilities. So that's something to keep in touch with and actually look at when designing the program. For example, when it got to the end of the program of NETmundial, it was just a bunch of the same old deciders sitting at the table, looking at the statements and making decisions on what was in, what was out, and what to change. They were illustrious people. They were good people. They did a good job and came out close, but it still did not feel, like a multi-stakeholder process. It felt like every other process we have at the moment, that everybody gets to do something along the way, but at the end of the day, the serious people will sit down and decide. And that is kind of what left us with some of the sour feeling that some groups had. I wasn't one. It was good enough for me, but that somehow their views had been routed around. That by bringing in the serious people who came out with a clean statement and used all the proper diplomatic words to cover over the differences of interpretation and of meaning, then something I just saw caught my attention and distracted me for a second.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but that when we got to the end of the process, we couldn't pull. So I think that if sort of we look at the process that's being built for NETmundial, understanding the stages, at the moment you're in that first early planning stage where it is almost a small group and it can't spread out and it can't allow that much participation, but it has to start allowing that participation. Can't wait until January, because by then 2 months will have gone by of, gee, how do I contribute? How do I participate? And also a very short time. So And one of the things that can come out of it is a better understanding of how roles and responsibilities fit into different stages of processes, and understand that different processes have different drives for those. If it's a technical process, you kind of expect technical people to be more involved at the end of the decision than perhaps in the middle. If it's a political economy, you may expect, academics. If it's, a country's policies, then you expect a government at the very end to have its elected people. So understanding the needs of a particular process, how do you then fit that to the various modalities and talents and roles and responsibilities by the stage of processes? So that's kind of what, and I perhaps hand waved too much and got distracted too much, but hopefully I managed to get that across.
Totally made sense. And, look, I mean, it was certainly the case. And one thing I would say in terms of learning, if you allow things to get down to the end and unresolved, then you end up having to do things in small groups at the end, and you're not going to have the buy-in, you're not going to have the feeling of inclusion, and you're going to have the people saying somebody captured the process and kept, net neutrality or mass surveillance or something out of the text when it should have been there, So we have to calibrate the process in a way to make sure that we don't end up jammed up at the back end, I would say. Wolfgang, I think you are back, right?
Yes, sorry for that I was disconnected. So what I wanted to say is, if NETmundial 10 plus, wants to close this gap which I described when I said we have the definition from 2005, we have the principles from 2014, and now 2024, we can be more specific about the procedures for the interaction. So I think ICANN was always a source of inspiration for the multi-stakeholder model. And so in the early days of ICANN, it was totally unclear how the interaction among the various bodies and stakeholder groups could be organized. So then it was then organized via advisory committees and liaisons. And in particular, the conflict was, what happened when the governmental advisory committee gives a recommendation to the ICANN board, which is not binding for the ICANN board. And so we have developed over the years very well clear procedures for the interaction between governments and the ICANN board within ICANN. That means if the GAC advice, a GAC consensus advice is rejected by the board, then the board has to give a rationale and to enter into consultations. So in a PDP in ICANN, in the policy development processes, we have clear defined steps, step 1, step 2, public input, and then comments, and then we have to give a rationale and a second iteration. If you are sitting in a UN meeting or in another meeting, and you give input as a non-stakeholder actor or as a non-governmental actor, you have no clue what happened with this input. There is no procedure, how this input can lead to a certain impact. So because there are no procedures. So what I've seen in the last couple of days in consultations in New York, when they...
You're still breaking up. Wolfgang, you need a new ISP. Okay. I'm going to fill in until you are able to communicate again, Wolfgang. These are all really good points you're making right now. Can I just spin back to the other part of what I asked, though? Do people feel like the global multi-stakeholder community, such as it is sufficiently organized and enabled at this point to respond effectively and provide the kind of input and engagement that's going to be needed to make this thing work well? I mean, we did have in the past a lot of communication between stakeholder groups and collaboration. My feeling is that that has kind of gone fallow, and I don't know if anything's being done to rebirth that at all. Ari, do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, I do. First of all, a lot of that old structure is still there and somewhat dormant, but it's there. In some sense, you don't really necessarily want all of those organizations with all of their old, silo-based intents to be there, because that was a set of organizations that were modeled around a very strict UN notion of how a multi-stakeholder, how stakeholders are given roles and how they find their responsibilities. And so they exist, the people are still there, but I think it needs to really start evolving. I think people, if I look at all the many, different processes that I've been, basically for the last month since I became unemployed, I've been wandering around, sort of visiting as many different multi-stakeholder meetings and organizations as I could find that would let me in, and basically looking at the energy is there. There's a very small group of people that are like core, and you see them showing up everywhere. But for the most part, you've got groups of people working on problems they care about, trying to do something that is participatory governance. They don't necessarily accept multi-stakeholder name because they think that's ICANN, and nobody wants to do that. And so many names are given to it, but the energy is there. Finding a way to sort of harness that energy, to reach into all these other folks and say, these problems that you're talking about how to do participatory, governance, and I'm using that, multi-stakeholder governance is as good a term as any, is here. We're talking about it. We're talking about how to do it. We're talking about how to organize it. We're talking how to get these models to recognize each other and be able to interface with each other. People shouldn't use the word models to interface like I just did, but use words that make more sense. But that kind of, no, I mean, I think in terms of models, forgive me, but to basically look at how you take the elements of all of those, and they are so similar when you step back from them, but it's all bottom up. So we've all come up with slightly different ways of doing very much the same things, because we are people and there are only so many ways we know to behave. So, I actually think the energy is there. It's how do you reach out and harness it is one of the things that is the question, and a lot of organizations give you a leg up. IGF as a platform, gives you a leg up if they want to allow themselves to be used as a communications means, all of these other organizations, many of us are members of different ones. If I look at this audience, they all are accessible by those people, and so they can be reached. But the energy is there. Is it organized the way we were organized 10 years ago? No. Is IGAN going to come in as the rich money bags and fund the things? I doubt it, but who knows? But but is someone else there going to be able to fund it, et cetera? So there's all those questions, and I wish the NETmundial people the greatest of luck. But I do believe the energy is out there, and it can be drawn from. How you do that, gee, very little time to figure it out, but I think it can be done. I've got faith.
Okay, Renata, do you have any thoughts on what do you? I mean, for the discussions you guys are having there, how to cultivate and pull together the people from the community to get them engaged. I mean, this is a big issue for us, right? Because we did have a lot more set up and working together 10 years ago than we do now, but there's still the latent demand perhaps out there. Have you guys talked about how you're going to try and draw people in?
Well, we are discussing these things too, and I think I need to say that we are now establishing this global multi-stakeholder scoping team with some of people are here, and maybe we need to discuss this in a more particular issue, because now we are discussing the proposal of a joint statement document to kick off the process, and proposal, including we are facing how we are proposing organize the structure of the committees. And then I think we have to discuss how we can mobilize and engage people in this process. But I have a comment about this because I think there is no perfect process. I completely agree with all the evaluations, Avril and Wolfgang, and we are discussing here. We are a lot of challenges in how engage people, in how make process more transparency, but we will always have some level of asymmetries between the participants, because we will always have those who are arriving for the first time and how to welcome these new people, and at the same time guarantee a more concrete debate and profound debate. And there is also this challenge in how to establishing the committees that we organize in the event and the discussions. And they need to have a degree of representation, and but they also need to have a limited number of people to be effective. And well, this process of definition and choices will always be imperfect at some point, but I think we need to improve participation, transparency, and dynamism mechanisms, and engaging more and more people. And I think we have a good experience in last NETmundial, and maybe we can study what we have. We didn't do this yet, but how can we improve? And I don't have the answers. At least I don't have, but I think we can, in a collective way, produce some answers. So please send us ideas, send us propositions in how we can make this new process more participant and more relevant. And we are very, very open to new ideas. And I don't know, this is always be a challenge for every process.
Okay, great. Let's have one last quick round on the substantive aspects of the statement that we're thinking about. And then I want to open it up because we have a lot of dialogue going on in the chat. We have a lot of people here who have got a lot to say and have experience in all this. So, I mean, one of the questions, of course, when we look back to the 2014 agreement, to the text was a set of principles, including both process type stuff about how you do multi-stakeholder conduct of meetings, and substantive principles, including human rights, avoiding internet fragmentation, things like that. And then we had a roadmap that suggested ways to pursue institutional evolution, strengthening the IGF, globalizing the IANA, building out sort of information sharing, clearinghouse type functions, and so on. So are we thinking of the same kind of framework here? How much attention should go to reviewing what was done last time, and how things have evolved with the issues that we addressed last time since then? How much should we be addressing a new set of issues? How do you balance those? Who has some thoughts? I mean, it's all very preliminary. We're just at the front end of this process, but who has some thoughts about the substantive focus that would make sense? I'm going to guess, Aubrey, you do. Let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you gave the questions at the beginning and asked us to think about them before we came. So I've got some thoughts. Basically, I think we do need to review. I think part of being a second instance of NETmundial means we have something to rest on. We did something. It came out with a statement. We need to look back and sort of say, how far was that good? How far did we use it? What has developed from it? I don't think we should dwell on it. I don't think it should consume the whole time. I think there should be a statement that's similar to this that comes out. I think taking a roadmap. How did that roadmap work? Did we get to where we were going? Do we need a new roadmap? Let's look at the roadmap. What roadmap makes sense for the next 10 years, 5 years, however many, So I do think it is important to, in some sense, recapitulate the output. It had output. That output has been quoted many times. Lots of us have brought it into discussions where people would have preferred not to hear of it. It has had importance, but I think we need to sort of take a little step back and where and how has it been effective, and understand those, and then recreate a roadmap going forward. So I think I'll stop at that point. But yeah, we should write something, and it should be a roadmap, and we should look at the old roadmap and make sure it worked.
Move forward, but keep an eye in the rearview mirror and learn from it, and trace progress, right? I mean, basically, makes sense. Wolfgang, are you able to communicate?
Yeah, I hopefully will not be disconnected again. So I can fully support Avri. What is also an opportunity for NETmundial is to clarify this confusion in the language which has emerged since the NETmundial in 2014. So in 2014, we had a general understanding of internet governance. This was governance in the digital age. But since that, we have seen a wave of new language: digital governance, AI governance, cyber governance, all kinds of new forms of governance. And this has created a confusion because, sometimes with good, sometimes with bad intentions, people reinvented the wheel and wanted to create, new channels, new tracks, new silos. So, the basic things is the definition, which was adopted in Tunis, was a very broad definition, and it included all technical governance issues and internet-related public policy issues. So that means if somebody comes now with digital governance, my question is this internet-related or not? So I cannot see any problem which is not internet-related and is a digital governance issue. And now we have this wave with AI governance. So what is different in AI governance? The basic principles which has been adopted in São Paulo 10 years ago, they are very relevant for AI governance. So there is no need to invent new principles for AI governance. Probably you can make some adjustments and can identify, some additional specifications. But this doesn't need that you governance field, either digital governance or data governance, cyber governance or AI governance. And I think this clarification could be really one of the outcomes of the NETmundial +10, so that you have a better understanding. I think the big step forward in 2014 was that we had a better understanding of the principles. I remember the time before NETmundial, when we had an OECD Declaration on Internet Governance Principle, a Council of Europe Declaration on Principles. There was, India came with a declaration on principles. So we had 10 or 15 documents on principles for Internet governance. And NETmundial summarized this and clarified it and said, these are the global principles for Internet governance. And insofar, we have now the opportunity to clarify, the understanding. That means to reconfirm the definition from the Tunis agenda and the principle from Sao Paulo, and add procedures for a multi-stakeholder internet governance. So we had the principles 10 years ago, and now we have a document, an annex to the roadmap or whatsoever, which is called the procedures for multi-stakeholder internet governance. So I think this would be really helpful. So this has not to be legally binding or very precise, but to make generally clear that it's not enough, to ask for input and then ignore the input if it comes to negotiations. You need some procedures, in their specific roles. So that means you have different issues where different stakeholders have to take the lead. Certainly, cybersecurity is more an issue for governments. The domain name system is more for the technical community. So, but more recognized, globally recognized procedures. Otherwise, we end up in really what some people has already called in Tunis governmental ignorance or governmental arrogance, and this will demotivate stakeholders, and we end up, with a struggle where the stronger stakeholder will try to get what they want. So this would be against the basic spirit of the multi-stakeholder model, and NETmundial can make a very strong contribution. And if the voice is strong, then it will be difficult for governments to ignore this in the GDC negotiations and the future of the summit on the future in New York in September, because the timing is very good for NETmundial. Thank you.
I think looking forward to the summit of the future is an important linkage there. One thing I certainly hope happens, there were so many instances in the years after NETmundial when we couldn't get intergovernmental agreements to even take note of the NETmundial statement. There was often refusal to acknowledge that this thing had happened, et cetera. And the most you could get was maybe recognize that it occurred kind of statement. So it'd be nice to see if the G20 could actually substantively connect somehow with the NETmundial statement or whatever. But I think there's a lot of people talking in the chat, so we can go to that pretty soon. Just to see if Renata, do you have something you want to add lastly on this? Yes,
three
sure.
lines very quickly. First of all, at least till now, our idea is not to review principles. After all, they are principles and should not change in a few years. But certainly to produce a new roadmap, I think we need a new roadmap and it's not any roadmap. It's a roadmap for the governance of the digital world. And as Wolfgang said, we have to clarify these terms, these definitions, these concepts, and including IGF today already debates all these topics. In Kyoto, we had a lot of workshops to discuss AI, to discuss cybersecurity, to discuss all the things around the internet and the so-called digital world. So yes, this is the idea till now, at least. Okay, great.
So as I said, there's a lot of good chat going on the side with a lot of veterans. I see Fiona and Henriette and Nigel, Jorge, Vittorio, and many others chatting. So I hope some of them will choose to jump into the conversation. And meanwhile, let's go to folks who have raised their hands. We have Mike Nelson and Jacqueline. Why don't we take 2 questions and then Tour de Table to respond to those, and then take 2 more questions, et cetera. So Mike, or comments. So Mike, go ahead.
Thank you so much for organizing this.
Could people please introduce themselves briefly and say who they are? Thank you.
I'm Michael Nelson. I'm at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, working on technology and international affairs, and I'm one of the veterans as well. And I'm going to be my curmudgeon self here. I'm not disagreeing with what's already been said. I very much agree with Avri that you want to take the positive things that came out of NETmundial, but we shouldn't spend more than 45 minutes talking about that at the summit, at every meeting is going to be held. And I agree with Wolfgang that principles were very useful, but it's not going to be helpful if we just focus on where we've been and if we try to do what all these other organizations are already doing. I was very happy to hear Renato say that we're not going to try to come up with some new document, and I think we just have to avoid that. I would ask the question, what is it that this meeting at this time in Brazil can do particularly well? And I would argue that what they could do particularly well is to build momentum around how the internet is used by government, for government services, for more efficient bureaucracy, for fighting corruption. Brazil has been a leader in that for 20 years. They're going to be the head of the G20, and India has been pushing its efforts in digital public infrastructure. There's a lot of momentum behind that at the G20. And this would be the perfect time to bring our community of people who work on internet governance across the board to a meeting that says, what is it that governments can do to make government use of our technologies more effective? And I would focus on the network technology. We don't want to go into all this new spaces. We don't want to do what happened to IGF in Kyoto, where 20% of the meeting was about AI governance, and we just repeated the same meeting that's being held in 10 different places. So focus, look for the opportunity, and digital public infrastructure.
E-government would be a different sort of spin. That's an interesting thought, Mike. Thanks. Jacqueline.
Well, let me, again, digital public infrastructure is government-led infrastructure that can be used by others. So it's not just, mainframes run by government.
All right, gotcha. Okay, Jacqueline, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
A little louder.
Better now?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, thank you so much. Nice to speak with all of you, and nice to see Renata and Professor Glaser again, my fellow Brazilians here. I want to talk a little bit about the G20 because Brazil is now assuming the presidency for next year. And I think it's very debatable if it is a multi-stakeholder process in parts because of the engagement groups, or if it's all a multilateral mechanism. But the engagement groups, as Bill mentioned previously, like the T20 for think tanks, the C20 for civil society, the Business 20 for business. Anyway, I think it's a possibility for engagement of non-state actors. And well, I'm speaking on behalf of Data Privacy Brazil. We are a nonprofit that works with digital rights here in Brazil. And we were just elected as co-chairs of one of the task forces of the T20. And this task force is called Inclusive Digital Transformation. And I think it's also debatable what we understand for inclusive, since we are talking about this participation in this kind of processes. But we are seeing that these digital issues, they are a growing process in the last T20s, on the last 5 years. Because initially they were groups talking about specific topics as education and the future of work. And now it expanded to internet governance issues, like Professor Klein-Wachter was saying. We have a lot of names and different concepts, but we have this inclusive digital transformation task force that deals with meaningful connectivity, with artificial intelligence, with digital governments, with platform regulation, data protection, cybersecurity. Anyway, a lot of topics. So I think the challenge here is for us to make this coordination, not just of this task force within the T20, but among all the engagement groups, because we have transversal issues. We have the S20 of science, have a task force specifically to discuss artificial intelligence. So if we were able to put these recommendations together, similar recommendations from different engagement groups, we have better chances of these recommendations to reach the Sherpa's track and the ministerial track of the G20. So I'm also taking this opportunity to invite all of you who are in think tanks or in academic institutions to submit abstracts to the T20 Brazil, because they are already open, the call for submissions, until January 29. So we are collecting these submissions, these policy briefs on these topics that I mentioned. I will put the website here on the chat, and I hope we can have great submissions to discuss with other engagement groups and to bring this to the high levels of the G20. So I think that's it for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Okay, so panel, digital public infrastructure and role of governments and the G20 responses to those points, and then we'll go to some other questions. Yes. Ari, go ahead.
They were both interesting ideas. I think they're different, though, than what was being suggested, and they're yet again specific topics, and as opposed to the more general topic of governance itself, as opposed to so I think they're both very valuable to do, but it seems like it's a different focus than what was being spoken of in terms of the modalities, the procedures, the how we take what we did the previous time in NETmundial and make it more useful to now. Now, yes, it should be useful to the G20 in a sense, and it should be useful to the digital public infrastructure, though I do find myself concerned about the government centrality of that topic. But still, I think that whatever, unless I totally misunderstood what was being talked about, it seems that each of those is kind of following that trend at the IGF of here's a good topic of something we should do. And I thought that this was going to focus more on the how we should do all those things we should do. So I'll stop.
Okay, some more process. Wolfie, are you able?
Yeah. A short comment. I think the G20 engagement groups is a great automation of these engagement groups in the G20 was came from the inspiration of the multi-stakeholder model when they established these groups. Because the reason was we need the wisdom and the knowledge of various groups and this wisdom and knowledge is not available in the governments. So that means it was a very selfish thinking of governments because we have only limited knowledge, probably sometimes limited wisdom, and we have a lot of other groups, so let's benefit from this input. So that's the idea of the G20 engagement groups. I was involved in the G20 engagement group of think tanks when Italy we had at the university in Milano, a wonderful meeting, but also here I realized then it's good if the engagement groups deliver, but then you have no knowledge, what happens with your deliverables. So there is, at the end, there's a big final report about the G20, and to say, it was great that we had this deliverables. But I think this is a very good point to push for a further enhancement of the procedures, for interaction among the stakeholders, what I mentioned a little bit earlier. And insofar, I understand these are two processes, G20 and NETmundial, but you could have synergies and profit, from it could be inspiration for both processes if you manage it good. So that's a recommendation to our Brazilian friends.
Well, I assume, Renata, you've been thinking a lot about those synergies since you're trying to basically hold the meetings at the same time, right?
Yes. Well, I completely agree with what Jacqueline said and Wolfgang and Avery, but I think the G20 is a very, very particular process in the area of a geopolitical dialogue. And I think the call Jacqueline made is very important. But I don't think NETmundial should have a specific focus on the G20 agenda. But of course, as I said, NETmundial can benefit from these processes, just as our event can end up contributing to the G20 process. I think we can find some synergy in this process. And I also only to comment what Mike said, and what I could say is that, of course, I appreciate your contribution, but I think our task is to have more protagonism in decision-making spaces, to be heard, to be considered in all government and multilateral processes. I think we should not focus our event, the NETmundial Plus 10, on telling government how they should use the internet, but on how they should take multi-stakeholder process into account when making decisions. And if you can do this, we naturally do the other thing, that what you should do with the internet. So I think the first approach is how we can be listened, and the second, as we are be listening, we can tell them what they have to do, what in our perspective. So I don't know if I made myself clear, but that my perspective about this.
Right. Okay. A quick reply from Mike, and then let's go to new questions from Nigel, and then we'll get some other people in the chat. Mike?
That was very clear, Renata. I think I wasn't clear. I see this as the multi-stakeholder counterpart to all the efforts that are going on around digital public infrastructure. And digital public infrastructure doesn't happen with without more effective internet governance, particularly if you look at the authentication layer, which India has been a leader in. They're getting other countries to use their universal payment system, but they have to make them interoperable. I mean, we have a whole host of internet governance issues that need to be addressed. And right now, it's mostly governments talking to governments because our community is not engaging as much. But I hear a lot of good things here. And I think the other word I would leave you with is techno-legal. This is a favorite phrase in India. Go get things built, then address the legal issues. That's how they've been successful. If we do this right, we will infect DPI thinking into all these different governments who will take part in NETmundial. And the result will not be a grand treaty. It'll be 75 new countries engaging in some very exciting projects, which will drive great things. So I love this idea of focus on the how, make it happen.
Great. Thanks, Mike. All right, so let's go to new questions from Nigel and Jorge. Nigel, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon. It's great to be able to take part in this. Just three very quick points, really, and a question. One, to the question posed in the chat: are governments going to back this? Well, you know, governments never come out with a clear position for a while, perhaps, but you know, certainly from the UK perspective, I think the timing of this NETmundial plus 10 and certainly the discussion we've had today fills one with a lot of optimism that we can, you know, fully support this, because this is just something that is really important. The second point is the synergy with the G20. I think is really crucial to be able to. For Brazil as the host of both events, to be able to say to the G20 that there's a real spirit of multi-stakeholder cooperation here in terms of the future discussions on the internet, evolving from what we had in the WSIS plus 20 in the WSIS onwards. You know, these things must evolve, as so many people have said here, and thirdly, in terms of the multi-stakeholder environment, yes, as people have said, I mean you know, it's changed enormously, perhaps. I mean, we sometimes I have to, you know, we have to slap ourselves here in the UK, if you like. You know, we talk about civil society and the technical community. Of course we do, but, you know, when we look at some of our consultation groups, academics, scientists, all sorts of different people come along to these meetings now, and it's much wider than the traditional communities. So really great. Thank you so much for what Brazil are doing on this. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. And Nigel's with the UK government. We should introduce ourselves. And speaking of governments, let's go next to the Swiss government. Jorge, please introduce yourself.
Exactly. Thank you, Bill. Jorge Gancio, Swiss government. So first of all, I can promise that my minister, my president will be in NETmundial. No, I'm joking. But we are supporting this process, and we will see how high we can go in the hierarchy. So that's the first point. And of course, I think Ambassador Schneider will be delighted to go to NETmundial if it allows, if his schedule allows it. Second point is I very much agree with what has been discussed on focusing on the how. I think it's very important. NETmundial was really a benchmark in having multi-stakeholder cooperation, developing outputs. And we can learn a lot from that experience. We can develop at NETmundial plus 10 sort of gold standard of how to do things, an RFC of RFCs, a protocol of protocols, a multi-stakeholder consensus way of doing things that could serve as an inspiration for those places like the IGF, where we still don't know how to do a recommendation in that setting, for instance. And it can also serve as a litmus test for those who call their processes multi-stakeholder, but do something very different and are just passing off things as multi-stakeholder when they are not. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, NETmundial really comes at a time where it's so important to re-energize the multi-stakeholder community in the light of the GDC process, which is going on and which will be more or less midway of negotiations when we meet in Brazil. And of course, also for the WSIS Plus 20, and might be incubator of ideas for developing WSIS into something that is able to address the challenges of today, not only with an IGF Plus, but also with an overall WSIS Plus. So I'll leave it by that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jorge. So, okay, panel, good inputs from UK and Swiss governments. Your thoughts in reply. Let's go around. Avri?
Okay, thanks. I had to unmute myself. Thanks. Yeah, I think that I kind of agree with just about all that was said. The one thing that popped up in my concern is when we're feeding in that how, and I'm obviously in favor of doing the how, because it's one of the things I'm suggesting we do. We have to be most careful not to try and impose any of that notion that there is one how. And that's where it sort of gets complicated in terms of, while we're thinking about possible ways to do things, to be sure that we're not in any sense, blessing one versus others, because that's where we start to have problems. But, finding synergies, and really glad to hear there'll be government support for all of this, and definitely agree with the need to re-energize the whole notion of participation after, being very much excluded, except for symbolically, from the GDC process. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Wolfgang?
Yeah, what I remember in the WSIS process, then it was just a challenge, to the next meeting and the next draft, which energized the stakeholders. So that means, and everybody was challenged and said, oh, something is going on, we have to make a contribution. And I think the processes we have now is stakeholders move back into their silos. They were very, let's say, all disorganized. And there was no combined effort of the stakeholders. I take only civil society. We have so many different initiatives now, and they are unable, to come together and to form a more coherent position of the stakeholder groups. I think this would be an important element to mobilize the stakeholders group and to say, what is your position to this? Please develop it from the private sector. So what do you expect from AI? What is the concerns of the civil society, so that you get this bottom-up policy development process also in an organized way. If you have 5,000 different voices, then governments are certainly confused and say, okay, we want to listen, but it's very unpractical. So that means the challenge is also for the stakeholders themselves, that they have to do their homework and have to come together. So we had the Internet Governance Caucus in the WSIS process. We had the ICC for the private sector in the WSIS process. So we had the ISTAR organizations for the technical community. So this has to be, let's say, reinvented and mobilized, and so that we can re-energize the processes, which will then can be channeled into the GDC and the WSIS Plus 20, or as Jorge says, finally in a WSIS Plus. Thank you.
No, I really, I mean, people are saying that they think that there's a lot of energy there and people want to engage. That's great to hear. I still think that the lack of institutional connections and ongoing collaboration between stakeholder groups outside the ICANN and IGF spaces is kind of a thing we're going to have to confront here. But it's certainly good to hear that governments and the fact that you're doing it during the G20 Renata, that should definitely bring in the governments for sure. It's going to be engaging the rest of the stakeholder community and getting them to collaborate, I think, is going to be a challenge. Did you have any thoughts in reply to the two government people, Renata?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I think it's very important. So first of all, Bill, I'm sorry. I want to thank for the words Nigel, Jorge, and Wolfgang and everyone else who are believing this opportunity to build an event together to re-energize. I'm going to use more this word. Multi-stakeholder processes. And yes, I think it's very important to have this government support. And of course, the Brazil government are supporting the event. And but as everybody knows, we have this G20 process, and the context is very different too. Yeah. So I think governments are going to participate, but...
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think governments are going to participate, of course, but I think in a less protagonistic way, because the context is very different. 10 years ago, we have this Snowden thing that make everybody's a little bit crazy, and the governments are so worried about the consequence and impacts of this, all that repercussion Snowden and surveillance have at that time. But yes, it's very important, and I think G20 will help us to bring governments into our event and mobilize these governments. So this is G20 in this way can help us with this participation and maybe make governments listen us a little bit more. I don't know if I answer your question. And Bill, I need to prepare myself for an important meeting here now that I am the one who coordinated this. And I have to leave in a few minutes. I'm sorry.
No worries. You told me in advance that you had to leave 5 minutes early, and that's fine. We're coming towards the end as well, but we want to get David Allen in here. And I also wanted to just note, again, I'm looking at the chat. There's a lot of people talking, saying things. Jane Coffin is making me cry by saying nobody knows about the WIGIG process and that the internet community and civil society used to work together. That makes the three of us from the WIGIG unhappy. Marcus talks about the need to reaffirm principles and clarify misunderstandings. There's a whole bunch of comments which we can't all bring into the conversation. But David, you get the final question, and then and Renata, if you need to disappear, don't worry. Okay, David, go ahead.
So this will be a comment, not a question, Bill. You're not surprised to hear, and I'd love to hear from some of those folks you listed as in the chat. To identify myself, as some of the folks who've been here well know, I'm also a veteran going back a quarter of a century to 2000 now. Before I jump into the main thought, let me say how exciting it is for those of us who have been concerned about democracy writ large to hear a discussion about how process can be made good in this. Democracy is process, in simple words. It's the only way you get a decent democracy. And to hear that NETmundial 10 going forward is going to play a major role in helping make that a better place, I can't think, frankly, of something more important. But let me represent a point of view from the past and now that is entirely strong, not shared by everyone here, but very important to have represented here, has to do with the roles of the various actors here. Are those roles going to be on an equal footing? Are they going to be in their respective roles? And of course, what I'm doing is moving from looking at process down in organizing from the grassroots up to the relationship between all that organization and the multilateral world, the state. Those of us who think democracy is what it's about, and you can damn sure count me in that, and many others that I represent here, feel the only way this works is if there's input from the grassroots up to those who make the choices by elected representatives. Of course, democracy is fragile and under threat, but as we know, it's though a terrible form of government, best that we've ever tried. I'll notice that multi-stakeholderism is actually an instantiation of democracy. It's saying, hey, we need participation from the grassroots. The whole issue is then making that an input into those who are elected representatives, again, as frail as that process is. With that, let me say my hat's off. Let's make that process work. It's, as Avri pointed out, when she goes from group to group, she finds the same people. Thank you, Avri, for that observation. With 7 going on 8 billion people in the world, we see what a challenge we have to make this true grassroots. Thank you, Bill, for making this happen.
Sure, David. Thank you very much. And that was a good closing sort of statement in a way. I think we all agree that democratization and bottom-up engagement and equal footing and all these things are definitely things we want to try and advance with this process. And I think the Brazilians are trying to support precisely that kind of endeavor. Hopefully the community will all come together and give the Brazilians input and support to make this thing work. It was a big push to do it last time, but we did it in one quarter, in the first quarter of 2014, and maybe we can do the same thing again, starting from a different standpoint in the first quarter of 2024. Let's find out. I want to thank everybody for participating. I want to thank in particular Jason Buchweitz, the Executive Director of CITI, for managing the systems and getting this all working. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be back again in January with another installment in this series, and I look forward to seeing you online and elsewhere in the meantime. Okay, thanks much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.